Shavkat Rakhmanov. That man gives me chills.
The tenor in your voice changed when you said his name.
Yeah, it went up an octave.
I've never interviewed him. I've never spoken to him. But I
can see the goosebumps.
I feel like I would get nervous.
But you want to.
But I want to. He's 16-0. He has a 100% finish rate.
It's the total package, right? It's all of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for being a man of class, Dan.
I get
it is a total package.
I get it.
All right, so Shavkat Rakhmanov has just revealed that he's injured yet again and will be undergoing surgery yet again, and thus the UFC has removed him from the official rankings. It's kind of weird, though, because I feel like if they're removing guys from the rankings because of inactivity, then there's a lot of other guys that should also be taken off, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Yeah, as someone who considers myself a big fan of the guy, this is pretty disappointing news. We haven't seen him step into the cage for 14 months, and I would imagine that after he's done with rehabbing from his next surgery, the absolute earliest we'd see him back in the octagon would be like September. I mean, I literally just Googled how long it takes pro athletes to recover from knee surgery, and it's saying anywhere from 9 to 12 months, so we might even have to wait until next year to see this guy make his comeback. Look, I think Shavkat is incredibly talented, and I think that if he stayed healthy, he had a great shot at becoming welterweight champ, especially when Bilal or JDM held the belt, but at this point I'm having serious concerns that he's just going to become another what if in UFC history. I don't think he's necessarily going to be my biggest what if in UFC history, because there's a couple that I hold above him, and yeah, in this video I'm going to be talking about all this and more.
You know what? Honestly, Kamaru, at first I'd be like, that's bullshit, but the reality, that's fair, man. It's been, dude, bro, he doesn't fight. Like, he hasn't really figured it out.
I understand you. But John, they left John in the rankings for over almost 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, but John's also the fucking greatest of all time with 14 titles.
Okay, I understand that, and I'm not. Yes, and I'm not disputing that with John. I didn't dispute it when he was kept in the rankings. I never disputed that. Rightfully so. But so basically, we're just picking and choosing when we leave someone in the rankings and when we don't leave them in the rankings now.
I really see where both of these guys are coming from, and dare I say it, I think that they're both right. Shavkat and really every inactive UFC fighter should be taken off the rankings if they're out longer for than, say, a year. If a fighter is effectively irrelevant to their division for that long, and especially if they still don't have a clear timeline for a return, then I have no problem at all with them losing their rank. And then when they're ready to come back, they should be given a fight against someone who is relatively close to where they used to be ranked, and whether they win or lose, they'll be ranked according to the circumstances of the situation. Honestly, that makes sense to me. What does not make sense is how we have fighters on the roster that are somehow allowed to sit on the sidelines for over a year, and sometimes even 2 years, and they still have a number next to their name. Like, why has Shavkat been removed from the rankings, but at the same time, Colby Covington has been inactive for quite literally 1 week less than Rakhmanov? We don't know when he's gonna fight either, and he's still ranked 13. Brian Ortega was out for like a year and a half when he got injured in his first fight with Yair Rodriguez, and I don't even think he was ever demoted out of the top 5. Again, I am in favor of unranking inactive fighters. I think if some sort of hard and fast policy was implemented, it would be great for the sport. It would probably lend itself to guys fighting more often because they'd be scared of losing their positions, and it would be more fair to fighters who are active and give them more opportunities to climb the ladder. But what I think is weird about this whole Shavkat situation is the seemingly arbitrary nature of it. Yes, I find it just as frustrating as anybody that this guy can't stay healthy to save his life, but to be fair, another reason for Rakhmanov being inactive also has to do with his wife and son being in a bad car accident, and I think that's a very reasonable justification for a guy taking focus off of his career for a little bit. Regardless, the guy's been away long enough where I'm not going to complain about him losing his rank. But where was this energy from the UFC when Tai Tuivasa was out for 17 months because he was out stuffing his face? Arman Tsarukyan didn't fight for 17 months either, and his layoff was much more controversial than Shavkat's. Arman missed weight against Islam and then turned down multiple fights throughout 2025, yet he was ranked #1 throughout that entire period of time, if I'm not mistaken. And as far as I'm aware, Colby Covington isn't even injured, so why is he still in the top 15? John Jones, as the heavyweight champion, didn't fight for 19 months, and instead of punishing him, Dana went on a media glaze tour for him. And who knows, maybe this is the beginning of a new precedent that the UFC is taking, which I think would actually be great, but until they confirm this as their new policy moving forward, I'm just gonna assume that they're selectively punishing Shavkat. I understand that the integrity of the UFC rankings has become a complete joke in the last few years anyway, so I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but make it make sense to me. To Henry's point, removing Shavkat from the top 15 is not unreasonable, but to Kamaru's point, it does feel like the UFC is picking and choosing who they decide to lay the hammer down on. There have been rank squatters worse than Shavkat in the past who weren't punished by the UFC, and there will be rank squatters worse than Shavkat in the future who likely won't even get a slap on the wrist. And at the risk of sounding repetitive, I'm going to make this very clear. I agree with Shavkat being removed from the rankings. I am advocating for all inactive fighters to be treated the same way that Shavkat has, but the lack of consistency with how the UFC does and does not punish inactivity is very strange.
I mean, that being said, he needs to figure out whatever the fuck he's doing and really pinpoint it, because if not, bro, he's going to be like the best there never was. Like, you don't know how good Shavkat is in reality. Maybe what about when he comes back and he gets healthy? Will he still be the same? And you know this, Kamaru, or I know this. If you let go of the sport because you're injured, like you will not, your motor will run different, bro. Your motor will run different. It's not the same no more. So
I think that Shavkat is an elite level talent, and if the rest of his career from this point forward is plagued with injuries and inactivity to the point where it's clear that it causes him to underachieve, then I'll agree that he'll be a big what if scenario. But even if that does end up being the case, which I think at this point is a very real possibility, I would still have a hard time calling him the biggest what if in UFC history. There are just other guys that I find myself wondering if things just went a little bit different for them, how much more they could have achieved. A popular what if amongst modern fans is Zabit Magomedsharipov, and I think for good reason. He's not my top choice, but with his style and the way that he looked before he left the sport, I totally understand why his retirement left a lot of people, myself included, disappointed. He had one of the most unique striking styles that the UFC had ever seen, he was undefeated, and he was ranked 4th in his division when he chose to walk away. Shit, man, Yair Rodriguez was literally cut from the UFC for a little bit because he refused to fight him. The guy had aura. But in hindsight, I just feel like Zabit didn't have the cardio to take out guys like Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. Yes, I am well aware that Zabit had respiratory issues throughout his career, thus his cardio issues weren't for a lack of work ethic. It wasn't his fault that he was born with bad lungs, but that was always going to be a recipe for disaster if he fought Max or Volk. Brian Ortega and Jose Aldo were ranked above Zabit by the time that he retired, and I feel like he might have beaten Brian, but I'm not so sure about Jose. That matchup is kind of a coin flip in 2019. Trust me, I was an enormous Zabit truther back in the day because he was so fucking cool, but the reality is I don't know if he had what it took to beat the top guys at 145 back then. But have you guys seen Zabit's younger brother though? That kid's a beast. Hopefully we see him in the UFC soon. Honestly, I think Daniel Cormier is a bigger what if to me than Shavkat is, which is insane to say considering he's like the second champ in UFC history. But DC started training when he was 30 years old. He won the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix after 3 years of being an MMA fighter. He was already 35 years old when he fought John Jones the first time, and he was 39 when he won the heavyweight title. By the time he became champ, he hadn't even been training MMA for 10 years. That is fucking insane. What if DC went straight to MMA after college? Imagine if he started training at AKA when he was fresh out of Oklahoma State at 22 years old. The fact that he was as good as he was given the age that he walked into the sport is kind of unbelievable, and although I have my doubts that he would have been able to beat Jones even if he started training MMA earlier, he would have had much more longevity in the sport. Also, he's fat. What if he fought at middleweight where he actually belonged? But my personal top what if in UFC history, and I guess it's similar to DC, is what if Brock Lesnar started training MMA fresh out of college? That's not to say that I think Brock made any mistakes going into the WWE because he clearly made the right decision there, but if he dedicated himself to MMA at 22, then I think he could have done some incredible things. I became a UFC fan right before Brock won the title at UFC 100, and much like many other fans, I irrationally hated him because I saw him as some sort of outsider of the sport, even though I was only a fan for like 45 minutes at that point, but I regret not appreciating the spectacle that was Brock Lesnar more than I did. And sure, he was hilariously fast-tracked to a title shot, but you know what? He beat Randy Couture fair and square, and he defended his title against Frank Mir and Shane Carwin. He beat all those guys within 6 pro fights. And what if, had Brock started training MMA earlier, would that have made it so that he wasn't terrified of getting hit in the face? Because before he got diverticulitis, that was the biggest thing holding him back as a fighter. I could see a reality where Brock could have been a long-standing heavyweight champion up until Cain Velasquez burst onto the scene, and seeing how to this day no heavyweight has been able to defend the title more than 3 times, if Lesnar started MMA at 22, I don't think it's crazy to wonder if he could have held the record for most heavyweight title defenses. Going back to Shavkat, I'm hoping that we'll be able to see him back in the cage soon, but with all the injuries and surgeries, I'm skeptical on if the guy is going to look the same. In a sport where just one injury can change the entire trajectory of your career, this guy has experienced like 3 major injuries back to back to back. For what it's worth, I do think it is very fair to question his training regimen, seeing as this keeps on happening to him. Like, is he just training too much? Is he training too intensely? Is he sparring too much? Like, what's going on over there? But all that aside, I think it's a damn shame that his title shot against Bilal fell through, because I feel confident that he would have become the welterweight champ had they fought. And even if he was up against JDM for the title, I still think he would have won that fight as well. But now that Islam is champ, and even more importantly, with his entire career in purgatory, his chances of being a top tier welterweight, let alone welterweight champ, keeps getting slimmer. Hypothetically, if Shavkat retired today, he would be a big what if. Not my biggest what if, but fans will justifiably be wondering what he could have been if things just went a little bit differently for him. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know your thoughts on Shavkat Rakhmanov. Do you think we'll see him return to the UFC this year? And what would you consider the biggest what if in UFC history? As always, if you like the video, then like the video. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
But moving forward, I do believe that fighters that can't physically be capable to fight, if you're gone for more than X amount of time, I think you should be taken out of the rankings. Because, you know, it's not everybody else's fault that's involved there. That's in that. Like, it's not their accident. Accidents do happen, but it shouldn't be based on everybody. So I think moving forward, I do feel like the UFC should probably do that. Say, hey, you know what? Let's get you out the rankings. Let's rebuild you, man, until you're able to get things straight and do your best to come in, injury free to actually fight.